Hey everybody, welcome to this week's YouTube Developers Live. I'm Jeff Posnick, broadcasting from New York. We don't have any of our Mountain View colleagues joining us today. We have lots of folks traveling to really exciting events, so I'm going to be kind of emceeing the show, but we do have some awesome guests joining us remotely from Zurich, and those are Ted Hamilton, who is the product manager for YouTube Analytics, and Christoph Schwab-Ganser, who is the lead engineer for the YouTube Analytics API. And as you might imagine, based on the guests that we have today, we're going to be really doing a nice deep dive on the YouTube Analytics API. This is a fairly new API that we announced for the first time back at Google I/O in July, and ever since then we've been slowly adding on some features. It's been publicly accessible for a few weeks now, and hopefully folks have had a chance to play around with it already. If you haven't, you'll learn a lot more today and hopefully get started soon. So just want to say hi to Ted and Christoph.
Hello.
Hi. Hi there.
And thanks so much for joining us. So I kind of want to just dive right in with some questions for you guys. And first of all, for folks who maybe have not played around with the type of analytics data that we previously offered before rolling out this YouTube Analytics API, there was something called the Insight Report that you could retrieve using the older version 2 of the YouTube GData API. And this would basically give you back a really big zip file, and the zip file would contain a whole bunch of comma-separated value files, and within those files had some useful YouTube Analytics data, but kind of the whole process of doing that zip file extraction and CSV parsing maybe wasn't every developer's favorite way of interacting with the API. So I'm curious if you guys could talk a little bit about how this new YouTube Analytics API is different from what we used to offer with Insight, and what's the developer experience like if you're using the Analytics API?
So the new Analytics API, it allows you to basically ask precise questions and then get really a precise answer. Unlike the old system, which just had a zip file full of answers, and you had to find the one which you were really interested in. So for example, now you can ask, what are the views, for example, for my videos from Italy? And you just get this number. Or you can ask, where was my video embedded to, for example, in what page? So this is another example of a query. So it's really a lot more, it allows you to make a precise query, and you get just the data that you asked for. It also it allows you to develop applications like from the web pages, whereas with a zip file, it's not really possible to call this from JavaScript. So that's another advantage.
Yeah, I mean, previously it would have been impossible, basically, to make a dashboard or an app where you're just looking up point data. You'd have to basically download the CSV, cache it on locally somewhere so that you could actually have quick lookups. But now you can get exactly the data that you're looking for. So, an Android app, an Android widget, or iOS, all of that becomes a whole lot simpler.
Awesome. And I know that what you describe with the YouTube Analytics API's approach, that's very much in keeping with something we've talked about previously on the show, the new version of the Data API, where it's a very targeted set of information that gets returned, especially compared to the older Atom XML response format that you used to get with the older version of the Data API. So kind of using the same analogy, you're getting exactly what you want for it. That's obviously better for us in terms of not having to run reports and generate metrics that you don't care about, and it's, makes for more responsive applications. Also worth pointing out that it's built on the same sort of backend that the Data API is using. So for folks out there who have already started their Data API integration, using the Analytics API should hopefully be straightforward for you guys. Same set of client libraries, same OAuth 2 type of flow, and hopefully you can build some really cool applications that use both of those APIs together. So I've noticed that there's still some statistics that developers could get via the YouTube Analytics web interface, and those aren't yet exposed via the API, or weren't until recently exposed. I mean, we do have a few announcements to make regarding some new statistics today. So, what's the long-term plan for the API in terms of catching up with what you could get via the web interface?
Well, so basically, the API should be every bit as powerful as the web UI. As a general rule, we want to enable you to do anything that you can do on YTA, YouTube Analytics, through the API, with the slight exception that we might be able to put more experimental data or something like that on the UI, but when we put something in the API, we want it to be around for a while. So there might be a slight lag there. But for instance, we hear all the time that earnings data is missing, or audience retention data is missing, and we want to find a way to provide that data so we can give you everything that you need to make a complete have a complete data set, basically.
Okay, so definitely patience is recommended for developers out there who are waiting for their specific favorite metric.
Yeah, exactly. It's not easy to wait, but we want you to have it as much as you want to have it. So
absolutely cool. Another thing that I know that developers out there have probably noticed and might have questions about is the fact that the Analytics API is currently marked as being experimental, which has a very specific set of kind of connotations around it. So what does being an experimental API mean for developers, and can you talk a little bit about what the process might be for leaving experimental?
I mean, experimental means that we still can make changes to the API. So basically, we are not bound to the terms of services that the other APIs are. So we should mention that we didn't make any breaking change since we entered trusted testing.
Right.
And basically, I think the criteria for leaving experimental is that we have confidence in the structure of the API, and basically that we have enough positive feedback from partners and developers that the API is really what they want.
Mm-hmm. So I guess there might be some developers out there who see experimental and say, I don't even want to bother developing anything or trying out this API until that experimental label goes away. And it sounds, based on what you're saying, that will kind of be a negative reinforcement cycle where we're looking for the feedback that we only get when developers are using these APIs. So if they just wait, we're never going to get that feedback, and that might actually delay the process of removing the experimental label. If I could kind of interpret what you're saying, and have the main takeaway that please, if you are doing anything with analytics and you're doing stuff that might use the older Insight report in particular, please start using the YouTube Analytics API. It's definitely, what the future of analytics will be for YouTube. It has all the benefits that we talked about before, and we're always interested in getting the feedback while we're in experimental phase, and even when we leave the experimental phase, we obviously still want to hear what developers have to say about the API.
Yeah, I want to emphasize what Christoph already said, is that it has been stable. We have not changed it. We have to mark it as experimental because we need to reserve the right. If we get feedback from you guys, to make a slight change, but this is basically the model that we use for our own app. So we expect it to kind of stay the way that it is. And yeah, people please do use it. And if something does change, it's not going to change significantly. So. The more feedback that you can proactively provide, the better sense that we get for whether things are working well or not working. And of course, we're monitoring the usage to see how that's ramping up. Cool,
definitely makes sense. Can you guys, either of you, speak to some of the specific limitations that are currently in the API around generating very large reports? Maybe running specific report types against channels that have thousands and thousands of videos. What's that experience like today, and what kind of limitations are in place?
Well, so I mean, it's basically limited by how fast you can iterate through the data, and of course your rate limit. It's not designed to basically be a data import functionality where we basically just export all the data that we have in our backend and you can ingest it. It's meant to be much more of a precise point lookup dashboarding type of thing. And then if you have a manageable amount of videos, it works quite well. Mm-hmm. But we have on the far end of the spectrum, we have some of our partners have literally thousands of channels, and each one of those has many, many videos. And so we'll work on a solution for that type of user, where they can basically download the data, ingest it into their data warehouse, and then so they can perform analysis on it. We're working on that type of thing, and that we'd expect to be probably in the first half of next year. So if you have immense data needs and literally just want to ingest the data to merge with your other internal data or data from other networks or whatever, that might be a solution for you, but it's still a ways off.
Okay, that definitely makes sense. And I know that I've heard questions from developers, specifically who weren't necessarily aware of that limitation. We try to spell it out in the docs, but for instance, if you are running certain types of reports, you can only retrieve the actual metrics for the top 10 videos in a given channel sorted by decreasing views, for instance. So that's the type of limitation that is in place. You can't say, I want every single video, but you can still run a report. It's just that it's kind of limited to the top 10 videos in your channel.
You can individually request the data for every single video.
Absolutely.
But you can't get a sorted list of beyond the top 10 for most things right now.
Right. Okay. And that's just something we want developers to know. That's intentional right now, and it's for all the reasons that Ted mentioned. So just be aware of that limitation for right now. And we talked a little bit about this, having to do with kind of how expensive certain reports can be. What should developers know about the way quota works with the Analytics API? I know that quota is always a big topic when we talk about the data API, and people will want to know, what types of calls are more expensive than others. How can they kind of optimize their usage? Because we obviously do need to place some limit on the type of API traffic that we receive. So if you could go into a little bit more detail publicly, I know our developers would be really happy to hear that.
Yeah, basically our API server does a variable amount of work depending on your query. Basically, it's going to fetch more or less data and processes for you. And basically, this is also reflected in the amount of quota that we deduct from your developer quota. And we have something documented on our, on the public documentation. And basically, what you can say, the more, columns or metrics that you add to your report, the more expensive the request will be. And also when you get, for example, for top videos, when you get a top video report and you add many metrics, it's going to be more like exponential expensive, as we look up basically every value in this table represents a separate lookup, and this is reflected in the quota deduction. So as a general guideline, it's good if you just request only the data that you really need, of course, and that you also, if you're ingesting data in a database, that you then be prepared for quota errors, limitations, and that you have an exponential backoff, basically that you rate limit your requests to our API.
Yeah, and I'm sure folks might run into that. People who, despite our disclaimer about this not really being a data dump, who do try to do a data dump and get individual reports one by one for each video ID in their channel, let's say. That's a really easy way to trigger quota errors if you keep doing that quickly enough and you have enough videos. So do be prepared to kind of back off in that case using, ideally an exponential back off.
You can also give us feedback basically on the quota limitations. Just tell us if they are, too narrow or whatever. We are still open, of course, to your feedback.
Yeah, I know that while we're in experimental mode, we have a default amount of quota units that we're giving people, and I'm assuming, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I'm assuming we could kind of be a little bit reactive in terms of upping that in general as a default if things look like it was set too low. So that's one of the things I want to hear about, and I'll pass it along to the relevant you guys on the team. So those are the main questions that I had, and we're going to answer some questions a little bit later from the Google Moderator link. For those who are watching this live on YouTube, you should see in the comments a link to the Google Moderator queue for any questions. So this is your chance to ask questions of Ted and Christoph, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Before we do, I wanted to show off some of the cool new things using the Google APIs Explorer. So both show off how you could use the API Explorer to run analytics reports, because not everybody knows that, and that in and of itself is very cool. But I also wanted to show off some of the new metrics that are now available via YouTube Analytics, and I think this is kind of available as of like earlier today or as of yesterday. Is that right, Christoph? Some of these things?
Some hours ago.
Yeah, so they're so fresh that our tech writer is working very, very diligently to try to get everything documented, but you won't necessarily see these things in the docs quite yet. That should come shortly, but nice little perk for tuning in. You get a sneak preview of what we're about to add to the API, or what we just added to the API.
Hopefully it works.
Yeah, hopefully it does work. I think I'm going, yeah. Okay, so if you take a look at what I have on my screen right now, I am using the Google APIs Explorer. And this is something that, it's a public tool that anybody could go and use. It takes advantage of being able to do a nice OAuth 2 in the browser flow. So I've already authorized access to this test account using OAuth 2, but if you go to this for the first time, you have a chance to authorize access. You don't have to put in your username and password anywhere. Integrates nicely in that regard. And actually, just folks might not be able to see what the URL is, but if you go to developers.google.com, I think there's a link to the APIs Explorer at the bottom. But the main URL is developers.google.com/APIs-Explorer, and you could get there from here. So I'm going to show off a couple of new reports. These reports are kind of run against a test content owner account that we have set up. This is actually something I wanted to point out because this came up recently in Stack Overflow. Somebody was asking a question and they weren't quite sure what the syntax was to use for the IDs parameter that you see over here. Let me make it a little bit bigger. The IDs parameter that's over here when you're doing a content owner. So that basically the way it looks like is content owner equals and then the name of the content owner. It's not a alphanumeric ID, it's the actual name of the content owner. So that's what we're doing in this case. We are doing a normal month-long report with a start date and end date. We're making use in this case of some of the new watch data that is now watch time data that is now available in the API. So we're asking for the estimated minutes watched, the average view duration, and the average view percentage metric. This is something that people have been really asking about since we announced the Analytics API. You can now do it, which is great. And the dimension in this case is video, and we have a filter here to the videos that we uploaded. Over here is 10 results, and we are sorting by decreasing estimated minutes watched in this case. This is another thing to point out for folks. Not everybody, this also came up in Stack Overflow once where somebody kind of missed that minus sign that was at the start of a sort order. That lets you sort by decreasing. So for instance, if you're doing certain types of reports, you need to sort by decreasing views. So be sure that minus sign actually is really important. And I actually already executed this report, but we could click execute if you want to run it yourself. And what you get back is your standard YouTube Analytics response. For folks who haven't actually tried the Analytics API before, you get back JSON data. It's pretty easy to parse. I think you can also request CSV data, if I'm not mistaken. I like working with JSON, so that's the default, and that's what I'm showing off here. You get back something that describes the headers for each of the columns, and then you just get back rows. So it's kind of like a serialized version of a report table, more or less. And each row in this case has the video ID, the estimated minutes watched, view duration, and the average view percentage, which shows, I believe, what the average viewer has viewed of the video, whether they've viewed 100% or 75 or so on. So in this particular case, 48.669%, which isn't bad at all. So this is really useful data for folks who are curious about how many minutes watched their videos have had, what the most popular videos are in their accounts according to minutes watched over a certain period of time. And something that you couldn't do before, and something I would imagine would have been very, very difficult using the Insight API. You certainly couldn't just have run a report and ask for those specific types of metrics. You would have kind of had to parse a really big CSV file and kind of interpret the results yourself. So that's pretty cool that you can do that now. A couple other things I wanted to show off. This one is making use of the playback location dimension, which is now available in the API for a specific video ID. And what this will let us do is get the top 10 videos sorted by decreasing views. Sorry, get the top 10 locations for playback sorted by decreasing values based on where they were played back. So in this case, this is a video that has presumably been embedded a few places. Embed over here on Facebook, on YouTube.com, a few other sites. Gives you a real interesting way of looking at your data. You might have embedding enabled for your videos. You want to see where they're being played back. It's pretty awesome that you can do that now. One other report to show off. This is the source of your playbacks, and I believe if I just scroll down over here, okay, yeah, the source for traffic to your videos. So over here you can see which playbacks came from, YouTube channels, people who went to your videos via the channel versus via search on YouTube versus via just like organic Google search versus related videos versus just clicking on the URL. So also really super useful if you care about how people are finding your videos. You want to see what the top sources are for people who are discovering your content, so you could maybe focus a little bit more on that. And that's also something new that you can now do using the API. So I'm personally pretty excited to see that new stuff added. Is there anything else that is notable that I didn't cover in these demos that you guys wanted to bring up in terms of new types of metrics that are available?
These are the main two features, so yes.
Okay, and again, people have been asking us for that for a while, so it's really exciting to see those there. Okay, so play around with those demos. That's a great way to get familiar with the API without having to write any code yourself. I mean, you obviously can make all these requests in an automated fashion using pretty much any language of your choosing. We have client libraries that support most of the popular programming languages out there. And if you are running into questions either using the client library, or maybe just something about the analytics API is not really clear, and you just run into any sort of issues, I want to make sure that folks know the right place to go for any sort of questions that you have. And the best place to ask questions is on Stack Overflow, which is generic. It's a good programming website that folks are hopefully familiar with. And if you tag your thing with YouTube API, YouTube-API, you should be able to post a question that we'll see pretty easily. So even though this is for the analytics API, if you just use the standard YouTube-API tag, that would help a lot in terms of us finding your question. And we'll answer pretty much anything that you guys ask. But there are some things that are not really questions, and they might be bug reports or feature requests, and that sort of thing is best posted on our standard YouTube issue tracker. So please make use of that for the appropriate types of things. And we do have some resources for folks who want to get started with the API. Lots of people like having sample code. So if you go to our documentation, developers.google.com/YouTube/analytics, you'll come to this main page, and over here on the left-hand side, there's a sample application. I must admit that some of the items in the sample application are not completely up to date. So you'll take a look and you'll see step 1 through step 5. There are a few changes actually specific not to the analytics API, but to some of the other APIs that it uses, namely the data API, that were recently made, which we didn't have a chance to reflect yet in these step-by-steps over here. But what we do have at the very bottom of the page is a full sample application that's kind of the full version if you were to go through all the steps yourself. And this has been updated to be something that's fully working. feel free to take this code. This is JavaScript code. It gives a pretty cool sample application that lets you do real-time requesting of data for specific videos over the past month, and then uses the charts API for charting the view count information for those videos. So it's something that we wanted to make available just as a very basic starting place. There's going to be more sample code that you should see over the next few days/weeks. It's definitely our goal to get as many languages covered, and make sure that people have a good starting place, regardless of what language you're coding in. So please check that out. And at this point, I think kind of wanted to switch things over to the Google moderator to see if anybody has any questions from there. So let's just do a refresh. And Okay, so there's one question over here, which I do not think is specific to the analytics API per se, but it's kind of a meta question about the best way of going about interacting with us during these live broadcasts, let's say. So it's, I want to know if people are broadcasting live via Hangouts, can see the comments that are posted on the live message feed. It would be nice to interact with the viewers that aren't included in the Hangout itself. So we're actually a little bit different than a lot of the other Google Developer Live shows in that we tend not to have public Hangouts. Christoph and Ted are joining us via Hangout right now. But it's not just random audience members. So we do ask people to interact with us via this Google moderator that's embedded at the bottom of every show listing. So, you found it. That was from Ali. You obviously found it. That's the way to get our attention during a show. I know that there is a live comments feed that you can post on youtube.com if you're watching the video there. That tends to be watched by our fearless producer who's running the whole show, and if the audio isn't working or something along those lines, that's a good thing to post in the comments feed of the YouTube video. But in general, the people who are on the air don't get to see that anything that's raised there. So use the Google moderator.
That's where you can call us idiots and stuff, and then we don't get distracted by that during the
Exactly. So fortunately, none of the two questions that are there actually call us idiots in this particular case. But we have a pretty... I'm trying to interpret this question here. It's kind of about publishing YouTube videos to a website, and it's asking whether you can use analytics data to analyze things. I'm not entirely sure what the question refers to, other than just the basic fact that yes, you can use the YouTube Analytics API to, for any video, regardless of where it's played back, get information about who's watching your video. So, take a look at the documentation, use the API Explorer, and I think that'll give you, hopefully, what you need to get started.
I think you might be asking if you can upload through the API.
Okay, yeah, if you're asking about uploading, that definitely is part of the data API. So that's not necessarily part of the analytics API, which we're talking about today, but it is part of either the older Google data version of the API or the newer version of the API, which we are calling version 3, and we recently also launched. You can definitely automate the uploading of videos into your own channel. So, yep.
And then once you do, you can definitely get the data for it.
Absolutely. Yes, we want everything to be as automated as possible, ideally. So a couple of other questions came in recently. Can you package OAuth for 2 different YouTube APIs in a single prompt? And the answer to that is yes. So I assume specifically the question has to do with whether you could ask for both analytics permission and YouTube data API permission within a single OAuth 2 approval flow. And that's a really nice thing about OAuth 2. You can specify as many, it's called scopes, OAuth 2 scopes. So you can specify as many scopes as you want in a single request, and you don't have to have the user see a pop-up multiple times where they say, okay, yes, I do want to give data API access, yes, I want to give analytics API access, that sort of thing. And that actually applies to any of the Google APIs. So let's say, I don't know, in addition to doing YouTube Analytics, you're also doing Google Analytics and using a separate Google Analytics API. You can put the Google Analytics API scope in the same OAuth 2 request flow and do all of that at once. And there was a question about where you could download the example code. So right now, the sample that we had on the site is just linked to from the main developers.google.com/YouTube/analytics, and going there, and then going to the left-hand side to sample application. What we've been doing for the data API, and we've been actually kind of successful, I think, in getting that started. I can pull that up and show what we're doing there. Is trying to do inline code samples when you look at the different API methods. So I believe this is one that has it. Yes. So this is for the data API, and you can see that we have inline PHP and Python samples right within the page that documents the search.list method. So we're going to first of all work on expanding our data API code samples, but I think we're going to also start doing the same thing for the analytics API. And when you go to the page that's reference, this is a little bit different because there's really only one reference page for the analytics API. But ideally we'll have some code samples right here on this page in all the different languages that you need, and that's something that we're hard to work on, and hopefully we'll make available pretty soon. Okay, so we are actually out of time. It was a really fun, full show, and I just want to thank both Ted and Christoph. It's fairly late in Zurich, and thanks so much for sticking around and dialing in and talking about the API, and hopefully we get some folks going out there and writing some code now that makes use of this.
Absolutely, thanks for having us on, and I can't wait to see what everyone does with the data. I think this will unlock some great new possibilities, so have at it.
Very cool. Okay, until next week, bye everybody.
See you.
Bye-bye.